We are the Group 5 and our topic is customization and simple usage of WSDL JAXB and SOAP UI. And the full code execution will be discussed later after the full report.
Hi guys, so for today's video, we're going to talk about the different ways of customizing the WSDL. Okay, now as you can see here, we have our Java class and the default WSDL. We're not going to be satisfied with the default one, so let's find a way to customize it. Okay, here in the picture, you can see a drop-down list containing different parameters that we can use in customizing the WSDL. First, we're going to use the highlighted one, which is the name. This one is mainly used to declare a name of the port type. Second is the port name. It is used to declare the port name of the web service. Next will be the service name. As you can see, we declare the service name to test smart catalog service, and on the other side, we can see that after we refresh the page, it becomes an error page. Why? Simply because the URL that we have used was not valid anymore since we changed it already. Okay, next will be the target namespace. I assume that most of you already know what namespace is. It is simply a group of names that we can use to avoid the conflict of having the same element name. Target namespace is used to specify our namespace. Okay, now let's move to some annotations of web method. First, we have the exclude. It is self-explanatory annotation. It is used to hide a web method and avoid it to be published. Next. Okay, lastly, we have the operation name. It is simply used to change the message names with an operational name that has a default value. Okay, here. Now let's move to the schema types. Take a look at this WSDL. You can see here the types. These types are the data type that is used in the WSDL. Inside this type section is the schema, and inside the schema is the import where namespace is declared as well as the schema location. The information of type isn't basically written or shown here because it is already in the URL in the schema location that is being imported. Okay, here we have a separate schema file that is being imported as declared to the WSDL earlier in the picture. Next. Oh, back, sorry. May edit ba to? Okay, here we have the... Okay. This schema contains the input and the output types, which is the get shop info and the get shop info response as the output type, and as well as its type, of course. Okay, now let's talk about the input type first, which is the get shop info. Inside this complex type is a sequence with an element of arg0 with the data type of string and min occurs of 0. Why is it 0? Because the string accepts null value. Okay, the second one is another complex type of the output. Inside the complex type is the sequence with an element of return and a data type of string with the min occurs of 0 as well since it accepts null value. Okay, now here in the SOAP binding, in annotating the SOAP binding, it gives the different options or parameters that we can use. Here, we have the different styles. This styles has two different types, which is the document and the RPC style. The document style is the default style. In RPC style, we don't have the section. Instead, we have a new mali. In annotating the SOAP binding, it gives us different options or parameters that we can use. Here we have the style. This style has two different types, which is the document style and the RPC style. The document style is the default style. Okay, in RPC style, we don't have the type section. Okay, here, first let's talk about the document style first, since it is in the picture, in the slides. Now here, in the document style, we have here a type section. In the type section, inside the type section, we have the schema, and inside the schema, we have here the import that has and declared a namespace as well as the schema location. Okay. Next, please. Okay, now here in RPC style, we don't have this. We don't cut. Okay. And now here in RPC style, we don't have the type section, unlike the document style one. But here we got a new section which is called message section. In message section, we have here the informations that is declared in the external schema in the document style. The document style has a type section declaring the import of external schema, like what I've said earlier. And in the RPC style, we don't get external schema because what we needed is already in the WSDL. Okay, here in this slide, we use web param to change or customize the name of the input. Web param is used to customize the child element name. And to modify the name of the output, we use web result instead. Okay, before I end my report, I want to give a tip. Both document and RPC style has its own advantages and disadvantages, but here's one that I know. Using document style allows us to validate the schema unlike the RPC style. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Edred Castañeda, and before moving on to another topic, let's have an overview of what we've learned so far. First, we created the web services project on a Maven archetype, which made it easier and more efficient for us. Then we've changed the pom.xml from its default name, URL, build dependencies, and we've updated the compiler plugin to Java 1.7 along with the Tomcat plugin to match with the Java 1.7. Up next, we will be tackling about the JAXB2 plugin in order to generate our POJOs from our XSD file that we created earlier. First and foremost, from our overview, we've changed the display name, as you can see here, in the init param, which originally stands for initial parameters. What it means is that it sets whether relative address locations in the WSDL are to be transformed using the request URI of the incoming HTTPS servlet request from its default to false. Next is the Spring WS Servlet.xml. The Spring WS annotation-driven element was added for us with the help of Maven archetypes generation. What it does is that the payload root annotation method endpoint mapping is then enabled by the use of the SWS annotation driven. In the application context, can direct request to methods. After that, we will then add a component scan from the base package of our work. By performing our component scan for our annotated Spring elements such as services and components along with the addition of the dynamic WSDL. Which you can see here from below, the dynamic WSDL generate the WSDL for us from the insurance service XSD file. In our manual WSDL generation tutorial, we generated an XSD file from the incoming insurance request and outgoing XML files. That is the insurance service.xsd file. We did this inside of IntelliJ in order for us to know how to manually generate a WSDL document. We will now then use this insurance XSD file along with Maven JAXB2 plugin to generate our Java classes. But before we do that, we have to use the JAXB2 plugin and put it into our IntelliJ in order for us to use it. From the right, you can see the syntax that we have to put into our code in order to use the JAXB2 plugin. first put your schemas XSD and bindings XJB into the source main resources folder, then add the plugin to your pom.xml. It will look something like this from the right picture. The Maven JAX B2 plugin is an open source project we will be using, which can be explained as: this Maven plugin wraps and enhances the JAX-B schema compiler, or XJC for short, and allows compiling XML schemas as well as WSDL, DTDs, Relax, NG into Java classes in Maven builds. Remember, when we manually generated the WDS file, we generated XSD files from the XML files for insurance requests and insurance response using IntelliJ. We will now copy those files into the source main resources folder. From the picture below, you can see those. We first copy the insurance service XSD into the resources. Then what we will have next is to run and compile the Maven build in order for it to register the insurance request and insurance response. That will be all from my part.
I am John Bert Lagidao, a reporter from Group 5. Earlier, we discussed the plugins about JAX-B. Now, we will discuss how to use the JAX-B. Una doon is, we will first annotate, like the last part. The annotation part is this, the web services. Yung may at na sign, yung may at. Then, sa loob nun is sa parenthesis, doon ka maglalagay ng bago, ng pagbabago or ng mga changes na may apply sa loob ng XML or WSDL or sa XSD file. And that is yung name equals testmark catalog and port name and yung mga kasunod niyan. Tapos, sa mga ginawa mong yun, syempre wala pang magbabago doon. Kasi, hindi pa nagbabago yung URL. Pero, yung namespace is nagbago na since na bago na rin dito. Then, sa next slide is ipapakita. In this main part of JAX-B, there is a Java class stated. And that Java class has the variable that will be used in the XML. This is the example, string and the double. But other data types is also accepted. And to call this Java class, you will need to create this other method. This picture, this. And after that, an XML file will be generated in the SOAP UI. This is an example of a generated XML file from a Java class. So far, what is JAX-B? JAX-B or Jakarta XML binding binds different objects to part an XML structure. In other words, it helps convert Java objects to an XML one. An example of this is a syntax from Java. 2 ints and a string will be converted to an element at an XML. This variable 1, variable 2, and 3. And the class name will match from the Java to an XML. For part 2, and for annotating, the annotation is done before. This is an example of annotation in JAX-B. At XML type. And this is the name, then the variables, price, SKU, and name. Then XML root element will be stated. The root element is product. Then the web result for the SOAP results. Then use the SOAP UI to get the XML file. And after that, you will be presented at an XML file generated in a Java method.
I am Jasper Janliquan, a reporter from Group 5. On this topic, I'll briefly explain on how to create an exception and how to throw that exception and get a filed message out as an output rather than the standard output message of invalid input. Notice here that the getSharpInfo taking an output property and depending on how the property returns as an output. Responsive property is something that this method recognizes. Right now, the method recognizes is just this two, a as seen in the slide. So what if the input property is neither of the given property? Let's make a custom error by adding an exception. First, let's change the string response to null. As seen in the video, there's a box. String response is now changed to null. Second, add an else block. If neither of the two, then it will throw the custom exception or an error. As seen in the second red box, there is an else block. Second, add the else block. If it's neither of the two, then it will throw a custom exception or an error. As seen in this slide, there's a second box that's covering the else block. After making the new invalid Java, first you have to code the first reason on why they happen, and the second is the error itself. We also have a method called getAutoInfo in which it will return the error details. As you can see in the slide, there's a code in here as a type string reason and string error details. So in the slide, you will see a string reason and a string error details. In a string reason, it will gather, or it will take on what the error it will be. And the string error details, it will now return the error details as why the error occurs. So now we'll have to go back to the shop info.java. Now we'll have to add the return that command says invalid input or that doesn't understand the property inside the shop info. As you can see in the slide, there's a red box that's containing on what I have just said. Here in the next slide, the whistle that gets generated automatically knows that there's a possible fault. The fault is a web service terminology for exceptions. If something goes wrong, we'll get the fault message. As seen in the slide, you will see the highlighted images as a fault message. Now that the operation executes successfully, you'll have the output message, but if the operation fails, you'll have the exception, which is a fault. Here then we'll go to the tester. When you go to this tester and you have a valid input, then you will have a valid response as shown in the slides. Here we'll have the response from the SOAP using a specific tool which will be discussed at the next topic. In this slide, this is not the original result for the tester. This was produced by a specific tool that will be discussed in the next topic. If you don't have the tool that had the method before, we'll get this error message instead. This happens because the Glassfish tester is not showing us the exception trace instead of the fault message, which some of us find is quite messy. So this includes on how to make a custom exception error.
I am Donald Toledo and I am the assigned reporter in SOAP UI. So first, what is SOAP UI? SOAP UI is the world's leading functional testing tool for SOAP and REST testing. With its easy-to-use graphical interface and enterprise-class features, SOAP UI allows you to easily, rapidly create and execute automated functional regression in its load test. In a single test environment, ready API feeds completes test coverage from SOAP and REST-based web services to JMS enterprise, messaging layers, database, rich internet applications, and much more. And that's just the beginning. So this SOAP UI is or SOAP web service as well. It's a RESTful and web service or HTTP based services. SOAP UI is an open source and completely free tool with a commercial and companion ready API that has extra functionality for companies with mission critical web services. So here are the functions of SOAP UI. Next. What is SOAP UI? When SOAP UI was initially created in 2006, there was no open source API testing tool on the market. So yung SOAP UI is the first open source API testing tool in the market, and the function of it is functional testing. So SOAP UI is the Swiss Army knife automated function and regression testing, powerful and innovative feature, help you to validate and improve the quality of your services and applications. Here are the functions of SOAP UI. So complex scenarios. Perform and validate a login procedure while testing your enterprise messaging and capturing client-server SOAP traffic all at once. And service simulation, mocking. SOAP mock services let you mimic and create robust or strong tests against SOAP and REST web services before they are implemented. They eliminate the expenses of building full-scale replicas of your production systems and enable consumers to access the services without having to wait for them and to build or available. Next is automatic creation. SOAP UI is loaded with enterprise class features. It takes a WSDL from your desired location and automatically generates a MAC service and its method for you. And custom responses. Insert a property expansion in any element to fill it programmatically, change and dispatch to specify different MAC responses to be sent out or more. And custom responses. Responses insert a property expansion in any element to fill it programmatically. Change the dispatch and to specify different MAC responses to be sent out and more. Real services. Mimic your real web services without having to wait for them to be ready or accessible. Then security testing. Security testing using a complement of tests and scans protect your services on websites against the most common security vulnerabilities. SQL injection. Secure your database and send in malicious SQL statements in order to make sure that it's not possible to access or weaken your databases. XML bomb. A document of extreme size can cause instability to make your systems inaccessible or make your system an attacker vector. The XML bomb scan will examine whether your system is vulnerable or to stack overflows. Next slide. Load testing. In SOAP UI, you can create advanced load tests quickly and easily on the base of existing functional API tests. Click and run test. Create a load test in SOAP UI from existing functional tests with just a right click. Pre-build load strategies. Select one of your predefined load strategies, simple, fixed rate, variable, or another to simulate various tests and conditions easily. Performance validation. Use to build in assertions to create your web services performance and to ensure that it matches your user expectations. Technology support. Building an application or services based on variety of protocols loaded with advanced technologies, ready API vibes, supports for all of common protocols and standards. So whether you want to test and deploy SOAP services or Flash web application, SOAP UI has got you covered. Automation. SOAP UI packs advanced end-to-end automation features, allowing you to dramatically reduce labor costs and improve your time to market. Ecosystem. A big part of what makes SOAP UI great is the universe of open source community and the partners around it who have accelerated the pace of innovation on SOAP UI. Next topic. So, next topic is gagamitin natin gagamitin natin yung Eclipse para mag-apply ng SOAP UI. So, first, open your Eclipse, then to use SOAP UI in Eclipse, first you need to install the plugin first. And click help in toolbar, just like in our presentation. Here in next slide. Here in this tab, you can enter the site where the plugins are available. And so in this page, you can see the information about the SOAP UI and you can follow and see the instructions below. And you can see the URL below. You can copy and paste it to the tab earlier in Eclipse. Next. Just like that. And next and go. Then After that, click add and name it SOAP UI and paste the link that you copy inside the site. After that, you can see below the available plugin and check the available plugin. Then next, wait for the installment. Next, yan. Installing the plugin in your Eclipse. Then restart your Eclipse. After you restart your Eclipse, go to the Window tab and show view, go to other. Yan, itong nandito sa unang picture, and search SOAP UI and choose SOAP UI Navigator. Click the SOAP UI Navigator and right click, then create a new project. Name your project and insert the WSDL that you created earlier. And you can see the URL that open in your browser. That's the location of your WSDL. And as you can see, it created a sample request for each and every operation and created a request 1. Ito yung request 1 ng dun sa operations ng SOAP UI. Then yung laman nung request 1 is sample siya ng XML and SOAP message. And also you can submit the XML by clicking the play button. Next. So yun nasa gilid, ayan. Yung play button na yan. Yan yung yan yung submit button. Then may kita mo yung response niya na nasa gilid. Yan yung magiging response niya na gumana yung WSDL na.
I'm Kylie Daido Orga from Group 5, and I will report using the Web Service Explorer to test a web service. This tutorial demonstrates how to test a web service using the narrative WSDL and SOAP using the Web Service Explorer. It shows how to use the Web Service Explorer to call operation on the temperature weather. Web service from X methods. The only need is that you have access to the internet. You can utilize the internet preference page, preference equal internet from the main menu. If you are connected by a firewall, aside from that, you can start with a blank workspace and no installation service. Number 1, launch the Eclipse WTP workbench. Number 2, select Run, launch the Web Service Explorer from the main menu bar. The first time you do this, Eclipse internal Tomcat service will start up and load. Wait lang. Number 2, 1, 2, 3. Number 2, run 1, 2, 3. Number 2, select Run, launch the Web Service Explorer from the menu bar. The first time you do this, Eclipse internal Tomcat service will start up and load the Web Service Explorer application, which will take a few moments. Number 3, after the web browser view open, maximize it, and you will see the UDD main. Number 4, in the Web Service Explorer toolbar, top right, click on the WSDL page icon. And now you will see the IWA PO125E, select a mode. And number 5, click on the WSDL main icon, and you will see in the WSD URL field, enter the URL http://www.x 123. Number 6, in the WSDL URL field, enter the URL http://www.xmethods sd/sd/2001/temperature service.wsdl. Then click on go and you will see the details of the soap blinding elements. Number 7, under operations in the right hand pane, click on the get temp and you will see the parameters of WSDL. Number 8, enter 902.110 in the zip codes string enter area. Then click go. You should see something like this in the status plain :return float.57.0. You may need to adjust the horizontal bar between the actions and the status plane upwards to obtain a better perspective. The Web Services Explorer is a JSP web application host on the Apache Tomcat servlet engine combination within Eclipse. It is integrated into Eclipse on the two levels, visually by the virtual of in running in the embedded browser, and logically by the virtual of it running as a thread in Eclipse JRE. Um, the Web Service Explorer provides the user with three important services. First is the UDDI v2 protocol provides comprehensive support for identification web service in WS Inspection 1.0 document and in the UDDI v2 or v3 registrations. And number 2, the UDDI v2 protocol provides comprehensive support for publishing web service to UDDI v2 or v3. And number 3, comprehensive of WSDL and XSD support for exploring and invoking web services narratively.
Hi, I'm Juan Miguel Villanueva from Group 5. The main steps for creating the simple Hello Web service are now complete. I'd like to take a quick look at some of the items that have been generated around the Hello name method you invoke. Before you shut down the Eclipse, I mentioned earlier that Eclipse methods span lists 3 methods in addition to the Hello name method you created. The web services endpoint is the URL where the service can be found and accessed. The URL will be displayed in the result pane if you click on Get Endpoint and then on the Invoke button. If you type this URL into your browser, you would be disappointed because while the service is available at this address, the interface you are using this is not. The actual HTTP URL used to display the test client can be found in the value in the URL pull-down at the top of the Web Services Test Client pane. This URL is also displayed in the Eclipse Windows top bar. In this case, the full URL is in the list. The URL is for the test client.jsp, Java server page JSP, which includes the frame you are looking at methods input and result. A JSP web page is simply an HTML page with Java code embedded to provide extra functionality. The JSP code, for example, extracts the parameter from the end of the URL and uses it to access the web services, passing the SOAP message to it. Other languages have similar capabilities. A parameter is passed to this JSP at the end of the URL. The parameter is the endpoint's URL, which the JSP uses to connect to the web service when making a request. The URL is on the list. Next page, please. In this case, copy the web service test client's URL into your preferred web browser. Make sure Eclipse is... In this case, copy the web services test client's URL into your preferred web browser. Make sure your Eclipse is still running from your call the web service, so Eclipse can continue to run the proxy and web service on Tomcat. In the browser, you should see the same client page and be able to access the web service in the same way figure. This client page are very basic, but it should be now clear that the service you implemented and tested within Eclipse and the web service that is publicly accessible have very little in common. We could use the JSP web page generated for the client as a starting point for our own web pages, and despite the need for a proxy, we could move the code to a standalone Tomcat and run our Hello application outside of Eclipse. However, we won't do that because the proxy approach is a little clumsy for a web application outside of Eclipse, and we can easily port the application to Tomcat without using Eclipse. After the report, the full execution of the code will be next.
Now here is our sample code that will apply everything that are discussed earlier with a few tweaks and edits here and there. Hindi siya kagaya nung sa una sa videos na pinanood namin, which uses Eclipse and Glassfish web services. Dito, we use IntelliJ IDE to create this Spring Web Services SOAP project. Ginamit namin is the Maven archetype, as you can see here, and binago namin yung Java version na pagraranan namin. Ginawa namin Java version 8 para mag-run lahat ng maayos tulad na sa pinag-referencean namin. And basically, we will use the Spring Web Services to auto-generate a WSDL file. And this sample project is made to handle incoming insurance requests and response. Now, kapag na-create na yung file, ganito na magiging itsura niya. Basically, nandito yung POM file, and then the Spring Servlet XML and the Web XML files. Una ko muna i-discuss is the POM file. This XML contains the build version, the packaging, URL, the dependencies, which contains yung Spring framework natin, yung Spring Web Services natin, which yung versions niya. And the build contains the plugins that will declare the version of our project, and other plugins like the JAXB that will later help us create the WSDL automatically. Next is the web.xml, and here we inserted an init param element that will enable relative address locations in the WSDL to be transformed using the URI of the incoming HTTP servlet requests. So yung servlet request na yun ay manggagaling dun sa Spring WS Servlet.xml natin. And here, ang servlet file naman natin is technically an XML Spring application context file. So, tulad nga ng pagkakasabi dito, the context will require a component scan in the implementation of our SOAP endpoint. So, dito manggagaling yung mga implementation na yon sa com.nicordesigns.ws, which is dito. Yan. Yun yung mga ginawa naming Java files to implement our endpoints. Then, the dynamic WSDL element, ito yung para sa auto-generation natin ng WSDL coming from dun nga sa naka-ready na nating insurance service.xsd. Ito yung susundin na schema ng ating WSDL mamaya. So, nandito yung location na yun. And there. Now, I will compile the project. So, the JAX-B plugin will work and will generate other Java files that we need to implement the SOAP project. So, clean, compile. And there. In-auto-generate niya na yung iba nating mga needed na Java files. And gagamitin namin tong Java files na to implement our SOAP endpoints. We will call these methods in our created interfaces and classes. These are the manually created interfaces and class files. And first, I will discuss this interface Java code. So dito, dineclare lang natin yung right insurance application, which is technically yung input, which are for making requests, and the process insurance application, which is output, which processes the insurance requests. It's an interface. Next is the class. The class insurance service implement. So here, as what the title says, it implements the insurance service that our program offers. And the @service annotation means the several data are handled and shown. Tulad ng SSN number, the first name, the last name, the insurance info ng product, coverage type, and then the option. Then also, kinol din natin dito yung process insurance application, which is the output after the requested insurance. The @service annotation also injects this data to the auto-wired annotation in the next class, which is the insurance web service endpoint. Now, the class insurance web service endpoint has the annotation endpoint. It means this class is a component type, which is for handling XML messages and Spring Web Services. Tulad nga sinabi ko kanina, the auto-wired connects this class to the instance service implement, now containing the data, and introduces a new insurance service that will be used below. The @payload route annotation tells Spring Web Services that the insurance application method is suitable to handle XML messages that has this local part, insurance request, and this namespace URI, which is the nicordesigns.com Spring WS Insurance. Then the response payload ensures that the response messages after the inquiring of insurance request will be the insurance response. Now it's time to test our program. First, we'll have to clean and compile. Then package. Now we will be using one of our plugins, the Tomcat, to run our SOAP in the browser. So after I run this, Now we can see that our web service is running, and we can access this through this link, and will be redirected to the browser. Now in the browser, as you can see, it doesn't work because the SOAP protocol is an older legacy web service protocol, which is independent of HTTP, unlike the more modern REST servers which can use the web browsers. But we can test in the browser if we can generate a WSDL by typing this. Okay, insurance WSDL, and there it is. We have generated a WSDL from the SOAP program. Now, one thing we can do is we can use the SOAP UI tool, which is already installed in my PC, so we can check if the WSDL can be used to create a SOAP program. So if we copy this WSDL and then put it to a text file generator, and then save it. Now we are going to the SOAP UI tool, which is this, and then we create a new SOAP project. So ilalagay ko lang dito sample, then we look for our sample WSDL file. Is this, and then we can see it works. It has the localhost service endpoints we created, and then WSDL contents. These are the WSDL we see. These are the WSDL we saw, and yeah. Then it actually created a sample request, which creates this XML file, a well-formed XML file, and yeah, I think that's about it. We have successfully generated a WSDL from the SOAP UI using Spring Web Services and using the IntelliJ IDE.